we're right smack in the middle of seasons at the moment. Are you finding yourself in a period of creative downtime, or are you headfirst onto the next?
You never really get much creative downtime. Downtime is a thing that you have to steal in fashion, especially as a designer, because everybody goes on holiday in August except designers, because we have a collection that comes out in September. It's kind of good. I think this season I'm a lot more in sort of control of what my process actually looks like, and I'm really excited for what I'm working on for September. But no, you never really get much creative downtime. You're just always, you do the show and then you go into sales and then you go into production, and by the time you do one show, you should already have been thinking about the next show.
How do you get started with a collection? Is it sketching initial ideas? Is it coming up with theme? Is it exploring research?
I treat each one like a case study almost, where each one is kind of contained within whatever it is that I need to explore at that time. The past few collections, particularly starting with the Fashionista collections, were quite intuitive, because at that time I really needed to invest a lot of time into developing my intuitive way of working. But recently I've been coming back to sketching, actually, which is how I actually started my journey in fashion. But each one is different. You usually start with kind of defining what the aims and intentions are, what it is that I'm trying to get out of doing that collection, and then I work from there.
Mm-hmm. And what were you trying to get out of your Autumn/Winter 24 collection?
That collection, I really wanted to push my draping into a world that became a lot more solid, a lot more structured, but still has this feel of ease and this way that I deconstruct as well. The collection was inspired by hurricanes, alongside this artist that I was using as a main reference, Bendel Hydes. He's a visual artist from the Cayman Islands, and he works at large scale, and he works in mixed media, but mostly with acrylic. But the way that he uses acrylics are very much like he is a watercolor painter. His work contains a lot of spirals, it contains a lot of swirls in the visual representations within the pieces. But in context, it also holds a lot of thoughts about the ways that I think of approaching my collections. In particular, the works that I was looking at from him that inspired this Autumn/Winter show, he did a series called Circumnavigating the Globe. That series was him looking at what it's like to come from a place that has built an identity on being a seafaring country, being an island that's underwater. The water has really kind of defined what our history has become. And he was looking at that. And I do the same thing within my work, thinking about where I'm from and what has the things within history that has added to the point of view that I have and the reasons why we do things the way that we do.
Should we talk about this first look, the opening look? I want to know what your thought process is in kind of deciding on that opening look. It's the first impact of the collection. How did you come to this as the introduction?
Is really my idea of deconstructing this idea of a hoodie, and instead having this hooded wrap that then wrapped around and gave that impression of what a hoodie would do on the body, but actually it becomes something a lot more complex than a hoodie. But I also like to work with stripes. One, because coming from an island that has a nautical history, stripes is something that is prevalent in our culture. But the way that I like to use stripes is that I like to kind of propose the way that the stripes are wrapping around the body, almost so that you can see how chaotic that drape actually is. Mm-hmm. And the skirt was thinking about this idea of getting a hurricane warning and needing to just grab the things that you had immediately and run out the house to go to a hurricane shelter, which did happen to me and my family when we experienced Hurricane Ivan. So I wanted to pull from that feeling of just needing to grab and go and translate that within a drape that then felt a lot more chaotic, but then holding that chaos in place. It felt like it really encapsulated how I thought about the drape for the season. Also, just this idea of pulling from archetypal garments like a hoodie.
Construction, reconstruction, and deconstruction were all really big themes in this collection. And I guess that circles back to this idea of sustainability for you and kind of building something out of what you have rather than something entirely new. Where in this collection do you think that really is showcased?
All of the materials that I use within the collection are dead stock. So that's the starting point. I don't think that necessarily the work reads as sustainable, which I think is a good thing. Fashion should just read like fashion. It should read like the fantasy. It should read like the dream. But the layers within the way that I build the collection and the way that I pull in materials, I think is what gives it that sense of value. Like the look, for instance, with the denim jacket and that red draped wrapped skirt. I think the denim jacket was basically made out of reworked jeans. That's a pretty direct reworking reference. I'm also playing with this idea of things that feel like maybe they're unfinished or they're in that space of decay and deconstruction, but not just thinking of the stereotypical ways that we think about deconstruction historically, but deconstructing the manufacturing process, for instance, which is something that I think is a problem for a lot of young designers, not being able to afford proper manufacturers. It's super expensive. You don't have access to all of these things. So just the approach to the way that I think about creating design and pinning things together, for instance, it's deconstructing the idea of how you can approach creating and making a garment. It is pulling in this concept of punk, but not the imagery of punk. It's the ethos of punk and the way that you think about an approach for how it relates to the society that we live in now.
There are a couple of pieces throughout the collection that I want to talk about, which really play up this idea of sculpture. It's this and this almost snood vest, which gives off a very buoyant quality. What was your thought process behind these kind of motifs throughout?
It came about by thinking of this sort of motions that Bendel used a lot in his works, and really thinking about how I can translate that motion into a drape. But then at the same time, I was looking a lot at this idea of these buoyant feelings of thinking of like the imagery that you see in a hurricane of seeing those boys on the water being quite chaotically thrown around. So it was kind of bridging those two worlds. It was pulling in these ideas of the imagery that Bendel's work has, but also thinking of these ideas of these buoyant shapes that you often see on the water.
There's one look that I really enjoyed, which was this bridal, almost mesh fishnet look. And I think this look in particular really spoke to this level of performance that took place with the show. The models were kind of choreographed to look like they were finding refuge from the storm. Could you talk about maybe where this look in particular fits within that theatricality?
You can read many different stories within it, right? You can read the idea of this wife whose husband went to sea and then got lost at sea, and she's like so forlorn and like really sad about the whole ordeal and like reminiscing about the time when things were good. Because a lot of times actually you would think of this idea of this wife who got married and then immediately their husband goes to sea and then you never see them again after that. And you're sort of like trapped in this almost limbo of like constantly on that night. I wanted this collection or this show to pull in elements of the theater, because when I was on island in Cayman, a lot of the programs that I did actually happened within a theater space. So I pull a lot of points of views of how to present a collection, how to present a story from aspects of the theater. So I wanted to pull a little bit of that within the collection as well, but also I wanted to work with this fabrication that I felt like in and of itself tells that story of coming from a seafaring island. But it also gives you a little bit of like this Kill Bill type vibe where she comes back and, you know, when she's getting married and then they like butcher her in the chapel.
I wanted to ask about Rihanna because she gave you the biggest shout out in Interview Magazine, citing you as her favorite new young designer.
I mean, it's been incredible to see her wearing my work because Rihanna is one of the pop stars that I've always looked up to. Coming from the Caribbean, and also presenting a version of herself that I related to. The version that was inspired by things like punk, were inspired by things like sort of subcultural movements, pulling from aspects of like my own Jamaican background and heritage as well. All of the things that she presented felt like they were speaking directly to me. And as a young person growing up being inspired by fashion, which Rihanna was at the forefront of fashion and still is, it was very inspiring. And I think seeing her told me that I could do it. Like seeing somebody that come from a same kind of island that I came from that had a story so similar to mine, it really kind of proved to me that I didn't and shouldn't listen to the people around me who were naysayers. There was a lot of resistance when I was starting out at 16, having done my own show, towards me choosing to take a career path in fashion. But having someone like her to look up to really meant the world because I could see someone that actually looked like me, who came from a place like mine, whose story I could relate to. And now to be on this side where this person is inspired by the work that I do and actually really genuinely values it. It's not just a stylist that's pulling it and then putting it on her. It really means the world because women like her are women that I've always looked up to, women who are from the Caribbean, who present a sense of confidence that I've always been inspired by.
Is that what makes her the ultimate muse?
I think it is what makes her the ultimate muse. I mean, other than the fact that she comes from the Caribbean, I think Caribbean women have something about them that they just exude this sense of confidence. And it's not about being sexy. It's about owning your space, owning your voice, owning your body, being confident in who you are, not taking no for an excuse. And you know, that's something that I've always been inspired by, and she's always been the muse for that reason.
Mm-hmm. If you could dress any of her eras, which one would it be?
It would have to be the rated R era. I think that there was a sense of darkness there that I'm really inspired by. I really think that there's a lot that I could have done if I was this person back then. There's a lot of like darkness within Caribbean storytelling there that I've always been drawn to. And yeah, I think that we could have done something really cool in that era. Mm-hmm. But all of her eras were like iconic, like even especially the one that she's in right now.
Yeah, billionaire beauty mogul mother
and lover of Jawara Alleyne.
And lover of Jawara Alleyne. Thank you so much for having us in your studio.
Of course, thanks for coming.